What happens when Hollywood royalty walks onto a talk show stage thinking the world revolves around them, only to discover that respect is a two-way street? In just 36 seconds of one shocking comment, a prince would go from honored guest to escorted out the door, leaving behind one of the most explosive exits in late-night television history. Jimmy Kimmel had seen it all: celebrities, politicians, musicians, actors. Every type of guest you could imagine had sat in that chair across from his desk. He'd interviewed thousands of people, handled awkward moments with grace, turned tense situations into laughter. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to unfold on this particular evening. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. Prince Harry was scheduled to appear, and the crowd was excited. Jimmy stood backstage, going over his notes, preparing his questions. He always did his homework. He knew about the royal family, the controversies, the media storms. But Jimmy's approach was always the same. Be respectful, be funny, find the human connection. That was his formula, and it had never failed him. The show opened with the usual energy. Jimmy delivered his monologue. The audience laughed in all the right places, and then came the moment everyone was waiting for. "Please welcome Prince Harry," Jimmy announced with genuine enthusiasm, and the crowd erupted. Harry walked out with a wave, but something felt off immediately. His smile seemed forced, his posture stiff. Jimmy extended his hand for a handshake, and Harry took it, but there was no warmth in the gesture. They sat down, and Jimmy launched into his first question. "It's so great to have you here. Welcome to the show," Jimmy said, keeping his tone friendly and upbeat. "Yes, well, thank you for having me," Harry replied, but his voice carried an edge that made Jimmy's smile falter just slightly. "So, you've been in Los Angeles for a while now. How are you enjoying life here?" Jimmy asked, trying to keep things light and conversational. Harry shifted in his seat, and there was a pause that lasted just a bit too long. "It's fine. Different from what I'm used to, obviously. But you Americans have a different way of doing things." The way he said, "you Americans," made the audience shift uncomfortably. Jimmy, ever the professional, pushed forward. "Well, we try our best," Jimmy said with a chuckle, attempting to diffuse whatever tension was building. "I know you've been involved in a lot of different projects since moving here. What's been keeping you busy?" "Various things," Harry said dismissively. "Though I have to say, the level of media intrusion here is quite remarkable. Even for someone like me who's used to it." Jimmy nodded. "The media can definitely be intense. That's actually something I wanted to ask you about. You've been very vocal about privacy, but you've also done interviews, documentaries, written a book. How do you balance that?" And there it was, the question that lit the fuse. Harry's expression changed completely. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward in his chair. "I'm sorry, are you actually questioning my choices right now?" Jimmy blinked, taken aback. No, I'm just asking. It's a question a lot of people have. I'm not trying to be confrontational." "It certainly sounds confrontational," Harry shot back. "You sit here in your comfortable studio, making jokes for a living, and you think you can question how I handle my life? My trauma?" The audience went completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Jimmy's face showed genuine surprise, but he kept his composure. "I'm not questioning your trauma at all," Jimmy said carefully. "I have nothing but respect for what you've been through. I was simply asking about the public's perception. It's my job to ask questions." "Your job," Harry repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. "Your job is to entertain people. My life isn't entertainment. My family's pain isn't a punchline for your monologue." "I've never made your family's pain a punchline," Jimmy responded, and now there was an edge to his voice too. He was patient, but he wasn't going to be disrespected on his own show. "I've always been respectful when talking about you and your family." "Respectful?" Harry laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think asking invasive questions is respectful? You think putting me on the spot is respectful? Jimmy took a breath. I think having a conversation is what we do on talk shows. If you didn't want to talk, you didn't have to come on. That was the moment everything escalated. Harry stood up abruptly, his microphone nearly falling off his lapel. Excuse me? Are you telling me I shouldn't have come on your show? That's not what I said, Jimmy replied, also standing now. The audience was frozen, watching this unfold like a car crash in slow motion. I'm saying that if you don't want to answer questions, then maybe a talk show isn't the right format. Maybe you're not the right host, Harry fired back. Maybe you should learn some respect before you invite people onto your show. Jimmy's expression hardened. He'd been professional. He'd been patient. But there was a limit. I have been nothing but respectful to you from the moment you walked out here. You're the one who's been hostile since you sat down. Hostile? Harry's voice rose. You want to see hostile? Try having cameras follow you your entire life. Try having people you've never met write lies about you every single day. Try losing your mother to those vultures, and then having people like you act like you owe them something. I never said you owed me anything, Jimmy said firmly, but you came on my show. You agreed to this, and I've been professional and kind, which is more than I can say for how you've treated me and my audience tonight. The audience started to murmur in agreement. They could see what was happening. They could see who was being reasonable and who was out of line. Your audience? Harry looked around at the crowd with contempt. These people who sit here and laugh at whatever you tell them to laugh at, they don't know anything about me or my life. Hey, Jimmy said, and his voice was sharp now. Don't talk about my audience like that. These are good people who came here to have a good time. You don't get to insult them. I'll say whatever I want, Harry snapped. I'm a prince. Do you understand that? I don't have to sit here and be interrogated by some talk show host who thinks he's clever. The audience gasped. Even the crew members visible in the background looked shocked. Jimmy stared at him for a long moment. You know what? I think we're done here. What? Harry said, surprised that Jimmy was the one ending things. This interview is over, Jimmy said clearly. I've tried to be respectful. I've tried to have a normal conversation. But you've been rude. You've insulted me. You've insulted my audience. And you seem to think that your title gives you the right to treat people however you want. You can't end the interview, Harry said, his face reddening. I'm the guest. I decide when I'm done talking. Actually, this is my show, Jimmy replied, his voice calm but firm. And I'm telling you that this is over. You're welcome to leave. Harry stood there, clearly not expecting this turn of events. He looked around, as if waiting for someone to tell Jimmy he couldn't do this. But no one did. The audience sat in stunned silence, and the crew just watched. You're making a mistake, Harry said, pointing at Jimmy. Do you know who I am? Yes, I do, Jimmy answered. You've made that very clear. But this is my show, and I won't let anyone, I don't care who they are, come here and be disrespectful. Not to me, not to my staff, and especially not to my audience. Unbelievable, Harry muttered, shaking his head. Absolutely unbelievable. What's unbelievable, Jimmy said, is that you thought you could come here and act like this. I've had actors, musicians, politicians, everyone you can imagine sit in that chair. And you know what? They all understood one basic thing. It's a conversation. It's not an interrogation. It's not an attack. It's just two people talking. But you walked out here with an attitude, and you've done nothing but escalate it. Because you asked me invasive questions, Harry shouted, losing his composure completely. I asked you normal questions, Jimmy shouted back, his patience finally breaking. I asked you about living in LA. I asked you about your projects. These are the same questions I ask everyone. But you took offense to everything because you wanted to be offended. Harry's mouth opened and closed. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. And then, Jimmy continued, his voice lower but no less intense, when I asked you one question, one single question about something that people genuinely wonder. About, you acted like I'd attacked you personally? I didn't bring up anything inappropriate. I didn't pry into your private life. I asked a fair question about something you yourself have talked about publicly. It's the way you asked it, Harry said, but his voice was weaker now. No, Jimmy said firmly. It's the way you heard it. Because you came here looking for a fight. I don't know why. Maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe something happened before you got here. But you don't get to take it out on me and my audience and then play the victim. The audience started to applaud. It began slowly. Just a few people. But it built. They were applauding Jimmy, supporting him, showing that they saw what was happening. Harry looked around at the applauding audience, and his expression shifted from anger to something else. Embarrassment, maybe? Or realization that he'd miscalculated badly. This is ridiculous, he said, but there was no force behind his words anymore. You know what's ridiculous? Jimmy said. You talking about respect when you haven't shown an ounce of it since you got here. You want people to treat you with dignity? Then treat others with dignity. You want privacy? Then don't go on television. You want understanding? Then try understanding that other people are just doing their jobs. Harry stood there, frozen. The moment stretched out, uncomfortable and tense. Finally, Jimmy turned to someone off camera. Can we get security, please? Security? Harry said, his eyes widening. You're calling security on me? You're refusing to leave my show after I've asked you to, Jimmy said. So, yes, I'm calling security. I gave you the chance to walk away with some dignity, but you seem determined to make this as difficult as possible. Two security guards appeared from the wings. They approached carefully, professionally. Sir, we need you to come with us, one of them said to Harry. Harry looked at them, then at Jimmy, then at the audience. His face cycled through emotions. Anger, disbelief, humiliation. You'll regret this, Harry said to Jimmy, but it sounded empty. A threat with no teeth. I doubt it, Jimmy replied. What I would have regretted is letting you continue to disrespect everyone here. I've built this show on treating people well, on having fun, on creating a space where guests feel comfortable. But that goes both ways. You don't get to come here and act like you're above everyone else. The security guards gently guided Harry toward the exit. He pulled his arm away from one of them. Don't touch me, I can walk myself. Then please do, the security guard said, politely but firmly. Harry started walking toward the exit, but he turned back one more time. You have no idea what I've been through. Jimmy looked at him, and for the first time, there was something like pity in his expression. You're probably right. I don't know exactly what you've been through, but I know that what you've been through doesn't give you the right to treat people badly. Pain doesn't justify cruelty. Those words seemed to hit Harry harder than anything else that had been said. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. He just stood there for a moment, then turned and walked off the stage, the security guards following behind him. The audience sat in absolute silence for several seconds after he disappeared. Then Jimmy turned back to them, running a hand through his hair. Well, he said, letting out a long breath. That was something. The audience erupted. They cheered. They applauded. They whistled. They were showing their support for Jimmy, for how he'd handled the situation, for standing up for himself and for them. Jimmy held up his hands, trying to calm them down. I'm sorry you all had to see that. That's not how I wanted this to go. I really did want to have a good conversation. You were great, someone shouted from the audience, and others echoed the sentiment. Jimmy smiled, a real smile this time, not the professional talk show host smile, but a genuine one. Thank you. I appreciate that. You know, I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've learned that you can't control how other people act. You can only control how you respond. And I wasn't going to let anyone, no matter who they are or what their title is, make you all feel uncomfortable or unwelcome. The applause started again, louder this time. This show is about having fun, Jimmy continued. It's about laughing, about learning something, about feeling good. And when someone comes here and tries to turn it into something negative, well, I'm not going to allow that. You all deserve better. You came here after a long day, maybe a hard week, and you wanted to enjoy yourselves. And some guest with an attitude isn't going to ruin that for you. The audience loved him. You could see it in their faces, hear it in their cheers. So, Jimmy said, clapping his hands together, we're going to move on. We've got a great show still ahead. We've got music, we've got comedy, and we've got guests who actually want to be here and who know how to have a conversation without turning it into a confrontation. He walked over to his desk and sat down, settling back into his chair like nothing had happened. But everyone there knew they'd just witnessed something extraordinary. They'd seen a talk show host stand up for himself, stand up for his audience, and refuse to be bullied or intimidated. The cameras kept rolling, the show went on, and Jimmy did what he always did. He made people laugh. He made them feel good. He reminded them why they loved watching him in the first place. Backstage, the producers were scrambling. They'd just had a prince thrown off the show. The phone calls were going to start coming in immediately. The media was going to go crazy. But in that moment, none of that mattered to the people in the studio. They'd seen Jimmy stand up for what was right. They'd seen him refuse to compromise his values or the respect he had for his audience. As the show continued, Jimmy never mentioned what had happened again. He didn't need to. Everyone there understood. They'd witnessed it firsthand. They'd been part of it. When the show finally ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Jimmy stood and waved to the audience. They gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. He stood there, humbled by their support, grateful for their understanding. Later, when people would talk about this moment, they'd talk about the shock of it, the audacity of Harry's behavior, the professionalism Jimmy showed. But the people who were there, who saw it happen live, they'd remember something else too. They'd remember how Jimmy made them feel protected, how he'd stood up not just for himself, but for them, how he'd shown that respect matters, no matter who you are or where you come from. Because at the end of the day, that's what it came down to. Not titles, not fame, not status, just basic human decency and respect. And on that night, in that studio, everyone learned that some people have it and some people don't. And no amount of royal blood can make up for a lack of character. The show that was supposed to be a prestigious interview with a prince had turned into something else entirely. A lesson in humility, in respect, in how to treat people. And while it wasn't the show anyone expected, it was a show that no one who was there would ever forget. Jimmy had handled dozens of difficult interviews before. He'd dealt with guests who were drunk, guests who were high, guests who were unprepared. But he'd never dealt with someone who came in with such a sense of entitlement, such a belief that they were above the basic rules of courtesy and conversation. And the way he handled it became a masterclass in maintaining dignity under pressure. He didn't lose his temper, not really. He didn't resort to cheap shots or low blows. He simply stated the facts, defended himself and his audience, and when the line was crossed too many times, he ended it. Simple as that. Before the confrontation reached its peak, there were other moments that showed just how badly things were going. When Jimmy had asked about life in Los Angeles, Harry had rolled his eyes before answering. It was subtle, but everyone saw it. The cameras caught it, and it set the tone for everything that followed. You know, Jimmy had said at one point, trying to lighten the mood, I've lived in LA my whole life, and I still get lost sometimes. The traffic alone is enough to make anyone crazy. Harry had looked at him with barely concealed contempt. Yes, well, Some of us have drivers. We don't all have to deal with such mundane problems. The audience had shifted uncomfortably at that comment. It was such a casual display of privilege, such a thoughtless dismissal of normal people's lives. Jimmy had forced a smile, but you could see the disappointment in his eyes. He was trying so hard to connect, to find common ground, and Harry was shutting down every attempt. "Must be nice," Jimmy had said, and there was an edge to his voice that wasn't there before. "Though I think most people here probably relate more to sitting in traffic than being driven around." Harry had shrugged. "I suppose, though I can't say I care much about what most people relate to." That comment had hung in the air like a bad smell. The audience had gone quiet, waiting to see how Jimmy would respond. He'd paused, visibly considering his options, before deciding to push forward with his planned questions. But the damage was done. The audience had already started to turn against Harry. "Let's talk about your charity work," Jimmy had said, attempting to redirect to safer territory. "You've been involved with several organizations since moving here. What causes are most important to you?" "Causes that actually matter," Harry had said dismissively. "Not the superficial things that people here seem to care about. Real issues. Important issues." "Like what?" Jimmy had asked, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Mental health, for one," Harry had said, though I doubt anyone in this audience understands what real mental health struggles look like. They probably think being sad for a day is depression. The audience had gasped at that. It was such an insulting assumption, such a privileged and ignorant thing to say. Many people in that audience had their own struggles, their own battles with mental health. And here was someone dismissing their experiences as if they didn't matter. Jimmy's expression had changed completely at that moment. The professional smile had vanished, replaced by genuine anger. "That's incredibly insulting," he'd said flatly. "You don't know anything about the people sitting here. You don't know what they've been through or what they deal with every day. I know they're not chased by photographers every time they leave their house," Harry had shot back. "I know they don't have the entire world judging their every move." "No, they just have to worry about paying rent," Jimmy had said, his voice rising. "They worry about keeping their jobs, taking care of their families, dealing with real problems that don't come with a safety net of millions of dollars." That exchange had been a turning point. Up until then, Jimmy had been trying to salvage the interview, trying to find a way to make it work. But Harry's casual dismissal of regular people's struggles had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "You think money solves everything?" Harry had asked, leaning forward aggressively. "You think being wealthy means you don't suffer?" "I think being wealthy means you have options that most people don't," Jimmy had replied. "And I think using your pain as a weapon to dismiss other people's pain is pretty low." The audience had started to applaud at that, but Jimmy had held up his hand, stopping them. He hadn't wanted applause. He'd wanted Harry to understand, to see what he was doing, but Harry hadn't understood. Or maybe he had and just didn't care. "I didn't come here to be lectured by a comedian," Harry had said, venom in his voice. "And I didn't invite you here to listen to you insult everyone in this room," Jimmy had countered. "But here we are." The audience members who were there would tell their friends and family about it for weeks. They'd describe the tension, the shock, the way Jimmy stood his ground. Some of them recorded parts of it on their phones, despite the rules against recording. Those videos would spread, and people everywhere would see what happened. But nothing would capture the full experience of being there. The electricity in the air, the collective gasp when Harry insulted the audience, the building support for Jimmy as he defended himself. You had to be there to really understand how powerful it was. Jimmy walked off stage that night knowing he'd done the right thing. He'd upheld his values, protected his audience, and refused to be disrespected. And while there would be consequences, while there would be people who criticized him, he knew that the people who mattered, the people who were actually there, understood exactly what had happened and why he'd done what he'd done. In the world of late-night television, there are moments that become legendary. Moments that people talk about for years. This was one of those moments. Not because it was funny, not because it was planned, but because it was real. Because it showed who Jimmy really was when pushed to his limit. Because it demonstrated that kindness and professionalism have their limits, and that standing up for yourself and others is sometimes the most important thing you can do. The prince who walked onto that stage thought he was above it all, thought his title protected him from consequences, thought he could say whatever he wanted and treat people however he felt like treating them. But he learned a hard lesson that night. He learned that respect has to be earned, not demanded. That courtesy is a two-way street. That being a guest means acting like a guest, not a king. And Jimmy, the humble talk show host, the comedian, the guy who just wanted to make people laugh and have good conversations, he became a hero to everyone watching. Not because he tried to be, but because he simply refused to compromise who he was and what he stood for. The show must go on, they say in show business. And it did. But that night, it went on with one less guest and one more story that would be told for years to come. The night a prince got kicked off Jimmy Kimmel's show. The night entitlement met its match. The night everyone learned that no matter who you are, respect matters most.